So today we're looking into Squelches. Today is day 3 of Sound Design September. This is the series where I explain the sound every single day for the whole duration of September. So let's have a look at what I have in store for you guys today. So here we have the example. I did change it up a little bit from the last time that we looked into this project, made a little bit of a special kick and bass for this one. So that's going to be the example sounds that we're going to be dissecting today. Now when it comes to Squelches, there's really two movements going on. What you'll see is that we'll have a saw wave over here, and this saw wave is going to have its pitch being modulated in some way, and then it's going to go through a bandpass filter, which is also going to be modulated through the filter cutoff. In this case, I'm using the same LFO for both of the parameters, but you can use different ones if you want to get different shapes. Of course, there's a lot of different things that you can do within the realm of Squelches, but the basic sound design concept is just of these two movements. Now you can see I'm doing a little bit more. For starters, we have like a trans gate over here. This is controlling the volume, and it's just making sure that the note isn't too long. As you can see, sometimes the release goes a little bit crazy here. We'll talk a little bit later about this modulation, but this is just there to make sure that it isn't going to get too long here. So it just cuts it off after a 16 note has played, and therefore it cannot extend into the next note that is going to play. Now the last modulations happen here in the effects. As you can see, we have an EQ where we're modulating both the low pass and the high pass up and down with the same sine wave that is loaded in LFO3. This is just to get a little bit more movement into the sound, and then finally to finish out the sound we have a delay here. So as you can see, the basics of the sound is very simple, but there are a few cool tricks that I'm doing in here that I want to talk about next. The first one is going to be this LFO over here. As you can see, there's modulations happening on the points here. And the way that this works is that we have two different note on randoms modulating two different LFO buses. So the last point over here has its Y value modulated by LFO bus 1. And then over here we have LFO bus 2. And what this means is that this is going to generate random modulation patterns for us. As you can see, again, it's set to 16 notes. So this is going to work for the sequence that we're playing. And the way that we're triggering this is through this MIDI over here. As you can see, we're just playing very short notes here, and that is why we get to play with the release. So the release is going to fill in the areas in between the notes here. Now I know that the track is in D sharp, but the notes that we're playing are still in A sharp. That is because initially I designed this sound in A sharp, and then for the example I decided to transpose it. So as you can see, the bass line is now in D sharp, and I've also made a separate kick for it. So you might say, well, the sound is going to be out of key then, but that doesn't really matter. The reason for that being, of course, is that the pitch is already being randomized. So in here, you can think of the pitch as not really controlling the main key of the sound, because that key is jumping up and down all the time. But you can think of it as changing the kind of center of the sound where the sound is going to be. If you have a higher pitch for the MIDI, it's going to sound a little bit brighter. And with lower pitches, it's going to sound a little bit darker. So you can think of it more as the tonality of the sounds rather than the key. Now the second trick that we're using over here is the modulation on the release. In this case, I went with multi-LFO here, and this is just using some randomization. As you can see, we have the joint version over here. But you could also use something like a MIDI controller to write in your own automation, which is something that I'll show later. The only real goal that we're trying to achieve here is the randomization of release times, meaning that we get some notes that are very, very short and very staccato sounding, while others fill up the whole note space up until the point that LFO2 over here cuts them off. So this is a squelch sequence. What I want to show you now is more akin to a one-shot. Now I just quickly want to remind you that if you want to get all of the patches used and created in this video, you can check out my Patreon page where I will upload them as this video is coming out. At the end of Sound Design September, I'm also going to be releasing a pack with all of the sounds that we've made in this series. So that is also going to be available up on my Patreon page. So if you're interested in any of that, make sure that you go check out my Patreon page, which is an awesome way to support the channel. So what we're going to do is make a nice one shot here in the middle. And I want to make this one half a bar long. So that is what we have over here. In this case, I'm going to show you how to make this in Vital. Again, it is really easy. We just want to think about two different modulations. So let's set up our bandpass. Let's go with 24 dB per octave and give it a little bit more resonance here. And since we're working with half a bar, let's set the tempo of two randomizations over here to half a bar. I'm also going to use sine interpolate because I like that algorithm a little bit more. And then we can just assign one to the pitch and one to the frequency of the bandpass. And as you can hear, we're already getting a squelchy type sound out of that. So now let's just get in our MIDI clip over here. Again, the pitch is going to determine kind of the brightness of the sound. So here it definitely sounds a little bit too high for me, so I'm going to go down a couple of octaves. That's a little bit nicer, I think. And now we want to make the sound itself a little bit more interesting. Let's add 2 voices of unison and lower the detune a little bit. And let's make sure that it doesn't get any lower frequencies by using a high pass. Of course, we can also set different ranges if we want to. For example, we can lower the bandpass a little bit like this. And now let's make it more interesting by use of the delay. Let's set this to 1/8 dotted and then to ping pong as well. Nice long feedback. Can make it a little bit grittier by having a distortion. I like that before the delay, something like this. And I can imagine if you want to sequence this one shot, let's say that we want to have it every 4 bars. I wouldn't recommend this actually in a track, but just for the example, we get something like this. Now the other thing that I wanted to show is using a MIDI controller for the modulation. So we'll set up a patch for that next. That's again going to be a sequence because that is where it shines the most. Here with these one-shot patches, it doesn't really make sense to vary the release time. Now inside of Serum, I want to do this a little bit differently. Of course, we want to control the pitch over time. So one cool way to do that is using the noise oscillator. Let's drag a triangle in here and let's set it to pitch tracking. And then we'll turn its pitch all the way down. This way we get like a very slow LFO from the noise oscillator. And then we can just FM the noise over here. And you can hear that we get this cool pitch bending effect out of that. Currently it's retriggering, so it's always going to give us the same effect. And that's because the noise oscillator is always starting at the same position. We don't have to do that. We can turn this randomness up over here. Maybe the pitching effect is a little bit too high, so let's turn the FM down a little bit. Maybe go down a couple of octaves. We can also turn up the pitch if we want a little bit of a faster pitch effect here. Maybe down a few more octaves here. And now all we have to do is set up our bandpass. In this case, what I want to do for the bandpass is set up the modulation trick that we saw before. So we're just going to drag this LFO over here, and then we're going to go to modulate Y here. We use note on random 1 for the first one, and then for the second one, we use note on random 2. And then within the matrix, all we have to do is make sure that all of these values are set over here and over here. So we do that like this, and then setting them both to unipolar, and you should see these lines showing up like this. And of course, we want to assign that to the bandpass like this. Let's use trigger here. And then finally for our modulation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the release so that we can modulate that. To finalize this patch, I'm going to give it 2 voices of unison again so that we get some stereo width. We also generate some stereo width with the hyper and the dimension. Let's add a little bit of distortion, maybe go with a hard clipper here with just a little bit. And then a compressor to bring out some of the frequencies. A high pass to make sure that there's no low frequencies in here. And then finally we're going to get our delay. What could also be cool is using a velocity trick here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to lower the level and set the velocity over here. Then inside of Ableton, for this triggering to happen, what I want to do is I want to start with a... And then I'm going to go into my MIDI effects over here and go to the velocity random all. This is just a preset with these settings that randomizes the velocity completely, meaning that we're going to get entirely random levels, but this isn't based on the note on random 1 or 2, because that would be the natural way of getting randomness inside of Serum itself. So this over here is just a third way of generating randomness. So now the final thing that we have to do is write in our automation for the release, which we have tied to the macro. So let's just go in here, configure the macro so that it shows up in the list of automatable parameters. And then I'm just going to go right click and enter the MIDI map. Make sure that we can map a parameter to it like this. Now I'm just going to play one long MIDI note here. Let's make it nice and dark so that we get some dark squelches here. I'm going to turn off this part over here and make sure that we are in override mode so that we can start to automate. Let's give ourselves a little bit of a count in so that we can now play with this knob over here when I'm moving it on the slider. If you want a little bit more variation, what we can do is also change the FM amount over time. So let's set up a macro for that. We're going to go with this fairly low part over here. Again, we're just going to configure, move this knob over here so that it's again going to show up in the list here. And then we can add our MIDI map. And now again, we'll record in a modulation. So that is how you make interesting squelches using Serum and Vital. So I hope you enjoyed this one. Again, if you want all of the patches, you can just check them out on my Patreon page. It's a great way to support what I'm doing here and you'll get some benefits in return as well. Another way to support me is by watching some more of my content, so I'll leave 2 videos up on the screen for you to choose from. So just pick one and enjoy, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.